Hello, hi everyone. Hi, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited to be joined by Lindsey Alexander, who's one of our Ultimate Novel Writing course tutors, and she's also an in-demand sought-after book editor in her own right. She used to work for HarperCollins in the US, and she's helped authors across a range of genres launch their careers and has worked with so many publishers and literary agents to develop and hone some of the best books of the last 2 decades. And so among the books Lindsey has edited are numerous New York Times and USA Today bestsellers, finalists for the PEN/Faulkner Awards for fiction, and also winner of the Abernathy Award. And so we couldn't think of anyone better to join us today to talk a little bit about what it's like to make it in the US publishing market and some of the kind of keys to success and what to kind of expect if you're going to submit your book to agents and publishers over there and what that whole process looks like. So just to fill you in on some of the authors she's had the privilege of working with include Rhys Bowen, Delia Ephron, Matthew Salaces, Jane Healy, Amy Butcher, Dr. Ruth Westheimer, Steve Madden, so many others. If you want to check out the full list, have a look on our Jericho Writers website, on our Ultimate Novel Writing course pages, where you can check out Lindsey's full bio and find out more about all the different projects and books she's worked on. And yeah, so with Lindsey's well-rounded knowledge of both the art of storytelling and the ins and outs of the publishing industry, as I said, she's extremely sought after as an editor, book coach, and educator. So we're really lucky to have her as one of our tutors on the Ultimate Novel Writing course and working with students from North America especially, but also from across the globe. So let's get started. So I'm also really pleased to be joined by my colleague Verity, who also works with us at Jericho Writers, is a writer in her own right. So Verity is going to be joining in with the conversation today. So Lindsey, just to kick things off, could you talk a little bit about your experience in publishing and how it's changed since you first started out?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that introduction, Kat. It's great to join you both today. So I started my career in publishing right out of college. I knew very clearly that I wanted to go into the publishing industry, so I was lucky to go to school near New York and did a number of internships in publishing, and then was really lucky to get a job as an acquisitions editor at HarperCollins right after graduation. And when I started, I didn't actually understand that there was a very big difference between an acquisition editor and a copy editor at a publishing house. Acquisitions editors, just to clarify the term, those are the folks who are accepting submissions from agents and authors and considering those submissions and helping to determine which books the publisher will publish. So when an acquisitions editor receives a project that they want to support, they present that project to the other decision makers at the company and have a conversation about the pros and cons of that project. And then they are the cheerleader for that project all the way from the point at which it's acquired through publication. So as an acquisitions editor, I really got a really close look at all the different aspects of the publishing process, from marketing to publicity to production to design to sales to subsidiary rights. Like, all of these are different aspects of the process, and being an acquisitions editor, you're essentially the hub for those different departments. So I learned a ton from the editors that I work with there and from folks working in other departments, and just acquired some fantastic projects, all fiction. I went back to grad school in 2009 for an MFA at the New School and worked with some fantastic writers there. And since then, as you said, Kat, I've worked with all kinds of different publishers at various sizes. I've worked as a consultant for a number of literary agencies and worked with a lot of authors one-on-one. And since I've started in publishing, the industry has changed a lot. I would say there's been a significant consolidation and contraction of the biggest companies. They've just gotten bigger, a number of them. And there's also been kind of an exciting explosion in smaller and mid-range size publishers. So there are a lot of opportunities for new authors out there. And if you have your sight set on publishing your first novel, it's worth considering that full range, not necessarily just the first, big 5 publishers, but really the whole breadth of the industry and all the different ways they can support you with your project.
Yes, completely. Just like thinking, to them, like the smaller indie publishers, and what's the experience like with one of them, would you say, compared to going with one of the big 5 publishing houses? How are the ways that you might be treated differently as an author, and what are some of the things that you might want to look out for?
Yeah, so I think something that I certainly didn't really understand or appreciate before I started working in publishing is that when you pick up a book and you look at the spine or the copyright page and see the imprint and the publisher for the book, large publishers like Penguin Random House, like Simon and Schuster, like HarperCollins, contain many, many imprints within them. And all of those imprints are publishing anything from 10 to 30 to 40 titles a year. And they're all competing for resources. So, your editor at your publisher is really your champion and the person who is tasked with making sure that your book gets all the attention that it deserves. But it's also competitive within the company for money, for attention, for resources, for time. And I know, and I get it, like a lot of authors, they want to publish with a big publisher because of those big flashy advances that we read about in Publisher's Lunch. But there are definitely advantages to working with a smaller publisher too, even though there may not be an advance at all, or the advance might be smaller. Smaller publishers are oftentimes better equipped to really support first-time authors on a number of different levels. They don't have necessarily the huge marketing publicity budgets that larger publishers do, but in recent years, a lot of the marketing publicity effort has shifted onto authors themselves. So if you're a first-time novelist with a big publisher, you're probably not going to get a 10-city book tour. You're probably not going to get a full-page ad in the New York Times. And so depending on what kind of experience you're looking for, working with an indie publisher can really give you a lot of support and, collaborative creative collaboration that you might be looking for. It kind of depends on what your priorities are as an author. So there are definitely pros and cons to either approach.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, when you're kind of going out and exploring all the options, I think you'll start to kind of get a feel about, what might be the best fit for you, and what are, some of your kind of key priorities. So I think it's definitely worth everyone kind of keeping an open mind and thinking about, considering all the different options out there, because there are so many, and like you said, so many of the new up and coming publishers are doing some really exciting things in fiction, and they're the ones that everyone's looking to for the next big thing or next big idea. So yeah, definitely worth considering. So thank you everyone if you just joined us. I'm really pleased to be here with editor and ultimate novel writing course tutor Lindsey Alexander. If you've got any questions for Lindsey, do pop them into the chat. Verity, I'll hand over to you for the next question.
Yeah, we've actually had a question in the chat from Debbie, if that's okay, Lindsey. So Debbie says that she is a British writer living in the USA with British historical novels. She's had much more feedback from British agents, small and big. But what is your opinion on where to find an agent?
Oh, that's a great question, Debbie. I would say, if you have the capacity to reach out to agents both in the US and in the UK, it might be worth just splitting the difference and seeing where it lands more effectively. I think, as is always the case with reaching out to an agent, your job as an author is to equip the agent with the information that they need to understand how they will approach a publisher, an editor, or a publishing house with your project. You're making a case to the agent is making a case to the publisher. So if you're able to make a case to a US-based agent that your British historical novel has legs, has reach, has something about it that's going to appeal to US-based readers, I think it's absolutely worth reaching out to US-based agents. But that said, that might be something that you want to contact UK-based agents with too. So I always recommend reaching out to no more than 10 agents at a time, just because if you contact 100 agents in one go, it doesn't really give you a chance to get information from that process. So for example, if you reach out to 5 US-based agents and 5 UK-based agents with your pitch, that pitch might vary somewhat depending on the agent and where you're pitching. And then over the course of that process, you can find out, okay, are they responding to my query? Number one. If they're responding to my query, are they asking for the full manuscript? And then if they're asking for the full manuscript, are they responding to that? And what information are you getting from their feedback or lack thereof that might help guide how you move through your process and hone your approach?
Definitely. And one thing I also would just love to emphasize is that don't get disheartened if you don't, get any responses in that first 10. Many authors have to submit to multiple agents before they get any kind of success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I was going to ask actually, Lindsey, is there a disadvantage or advantage to having an agent based in a different country to you?
Well, I would say, I've worked with authors all over the world, and some folks, are writing in places where there isn't a huge publishing infrastructure. So I think if you're writing what you think of as a commercial novel, it's absolutely worth reaching out to an agent based in the US. And again, I think it kind of comes down to the argument that you're making to the agent about why your project has a readership in wherever it's going to be published. So if you're able to make that case from where you live to a publisher or an agent based in the US, great. I don't know if there's a specific advantage besides that, especially larger publishers are able to support projects with larger marketing publicity budgets. They have reach, they have distribution access, they pay advances. So I would say if that's something that is a priority for you as an author, then it's absolutely worth considering a US-based agent. Now, depending on the genre that you're working in, if you are a nonfiction author and you're pitching a book and that pitch includes information about your platform and the activities you're going to do to support that book's publication, your location will be relevant, and that will be part of the conversation you have with your agent. If you are, saying that you are going to be able to get in front of people, if you are traveling, if you are writing a book from one country that concerns, information or something that's happening in another country, these are all things to consider for where you pitch. But I would say if you're working on a novel, in most cases, I don't think any disadvantage to pitching a US-based agent.
Interesting.
So in your experience as an editor, you've worked on numerous bestsellers. I'm just curious, how much can you tell in those early stages of working on a book if it's going to be a success or not? What are the kind of key things that kind of stand out?
That's a great question. And I think there are a couple ways to think about that. One is, I've worked on a lot of bestsellers that are follow-up novels by agents who are previous bestsellers. So those are kind of predetermined bestsellers in that they've had an established track record, they've had sales, they're able to demonstrate to the publisher that they are going to be a hit. In which case the publisher is kind of automatically, not necessarily automatically, but they are more likely to get behind that author with the support that authors want and need on the publicity front, on the marketing front. For first-time authors, I would say, so much of that conversation happens between, sometimes it happens at the point at which the book is acquired by a publisher. So you'll hear sometimes about books going to auction, and that's a situation where an agent has interest from multiple publishers, and those publishers are essentially bidding on a project. If a publisher is acquiring a book for a significant amount of money, they're laying out an investment in that project, and they are essentially saying, we think that your book's going to be a success, so we're offering you this big advance, and we're going to put the resources behind this book to make it a success. That's not the case for every book, and that doesn't mean that those books with lower advances are going to not be great successes or win awards, but there are a lot of things that happen at the very early side of the publishing process that don't necessarily have so much to do with the book's content itself. Like, I don't think you can look at a manuscript and say automatically, okay, this is going to be a bestseller. That's kind of a way that the book can be marketed to a publisher by an agent to drum up interest and support for that book. But I would say generally, if a book has received a large advance, if the author is getting a lot of support from the outset, that support is most likely going to continue through the course of the publishing process all the way to its launch. And that's not as exciting from the editorial side. There's not a lot that we can kind of foretell about the book itself just from the text about its potential and success. But certainly there are genres where books are in high demand, and authors who have a great resume or have done something really exciting and they've published a number of stories, or they've gotten awards already before their first book is even coming to publishers for acquisition, that help tell that publisher, hey, this author is going to really make a splash, in which case the outlook for that book might be more positive. But, as is always the case in publishing, there's no guarantees. An author can receive a big advance and then the book can make a big splash. Sometimes the splash is a little smaller, and sometimes some of those factors are really out of the author's or the publisher's control. So,
yeah, definitely. I think there's definitely kind of that element of just, I guess it's luck and hitting, the kind of the culture at the right moment and things that resonate and speak to people. I think it can be variable. So it is always really interesting to see what performs well. So you kind of touched on this a little bit, but could you kind of give us a brief summary of what the US publishing process looks like step by step? So so I think it would be helpful actually also for people to know, the best way to submit to agents over in the States, and then kind of to go take it from there.
Sure. So The best way to submit to agents is fairly straightforward. Follow the guidelines that they offer on their website. And those guidelines vary somewhat from agent to agent, but they're often pretty straightforward, and they're made very clear on the agent's website. Sometimes the agent will request submissions through a submission management program. Sometimes they'll accept submissions directly through email. Sometimes they have a portal on their website. So the wonderful thing about modern publishing is that agents are a lot more accessible and transparent than they've ever been. So you can find, a lot of agents are on social media talking about what they're looking for. Manuscript wish list is a great place to get a sense for what agents are looking for what. And going through the actual process of submitting your work to agents usually involves three components. There's the query letter, which is that kind of marketing pitch about your book and its marketability that contains a synopsis that is usually a shorter version of the synopsis that is more similar to something you would find on the back jacket of a book. So that synopsis that you read that gets you really excited about reading the book, that lets you know, like, this is a book that I want to dive into, or this book is not for me. That also includes a little bio of you in the query letter and a couple of other components, like your book's word count, for example. The other two components are the formal synopsis, which is a bit longer, and that's kind of the beginning, middle, and end, just walkthrough of what your book is about, how it ends. That's not something that you use in the synopsis in the query letter. It is something that you use in the formal synopsis that's going to accompany your query letter. And the third piece of the puzzle is are your sample pages. And how many pages an agent wants depends on the agent, but that will often be part of that submission process as well. So, again, like I recommend reaching out to about 10 agents at a time in batches. So don't contact everybody you're interested in working with right out of the gate. And when a book is something that appeals to an agent, they will sign a formal contract with an author. No money should ever be exchanged before your book is actually sold to a publisher. So the agent makes their commission when your book is sold to a publisher. If you've ever heard from an agent who asks for an hourly fee or some other kind of commissioner fee, that agent is probably not above board. So just something to kind of be aware of. There aren't many bad actors out there, but they're out there sometimes. So you'll sign a contract with your agent. The agent will submit your project to editors at publishing houses. If the editor is interested in acquiring your book, that book will be presented to a number of stakeholders at that publishing company, and they will choose to acquire it or not. An author is then contracted with a publisher, and the book enters the development process. So different acquiring editors at different publishing houses have kind of varying levels of creative collaboration with authors. So, and it also depends a lot on the manuscript itself. Sometimes there will be something like an initial editorial letter where the editor at the publishing house will send an author a number of notes for revision. Sometimes the manuscript will go directly into copy editing. And while this is happening, design is taking place for the cover. Conversations are happening among the sales folks, the publicity folks, the marketing folks. So all these different teams within a publishing house are collaborating to think about how they'll actually launch the book. That process in total takes anywhere from 9 to 12 months, sometimes longer. So you can expect that from the time your book is acquired by a publisher for publication, it's going to be about a year until your book lands on bookshelves.
Yeah, I think that's really useful to know, because I think there's a bit of mystery around that sometimes, and actually how long it can take, and also the length of time it can take when an agent's going around and selling your book to publishers. That can also take some time as well. So I think it's just something really useful to kind of bear in mind. Verity, I'm just going to hand back over to you.
Yeah, we've just had a really good question from Mike, actually, which kind of leads into the question I was going to ask you, Lindsey, about sort of trends, I guess, in the US market and what genres are mostly in demand.
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I think it really depends on the publisher. And, we've seen a lot of sales in romance. We've seen a lot of sales in historical. We've seen a lot of sales in what we call, as like an umbrella term, book club fiction. Book club fiction can mean a number of different things, as can women's fiction, what is not a term I particularly care for, but essentially, books that are going to sell a lot of copies to readers who want to sit down and talk about them with folks in their book club, with folks in their family, with their friends. And what we describe as book club fiction can be a number of different genres. Sometimes it's mystery and thriller, suspense. Sometimes it's romance. Sometimes it's historical. Sometimes it's what we call upmarket fiction. So books that have literary chops, but commercial potential as well. So Yeah, it depends on the publisher. I mean, you will find, especially if you're looking at more small indie publishers, that some of those publishers really have specialties in genres. And I think looking at like Publishers Lunch, if you don't already subscribe, is a great place to go to see what's selling from agents to publishers, just to get a sense. And they'll always have a little description of those books. So that's a great place. They have a free version of their daily email. That's a great place just to be informed about what's selling in real time to publishers and give you a big picture of those genres and titles and authors who are getting acquired for publication.
Do you think what's trending affects your chances of an agent picking you up? Because I come across writers who have been told, if what you're writing at the moment isn't really what, people are buying, an agent is less likely to pick it up. Do you agree with that? Or do you think it doesn't affect it as much?
I think it applies to some extent. I think more useful are maybe genre standards. So if you're writing a literary novel that is 200,000 words, your book is probably not going to be acquired, just because that's a really, really long book, and agents are going to see that query letter and see 200,000 words on there, and it's going to be an immediate red flag. So I would say no matter what genre you're publishing in, read widely in your genre. Know what other books are being published, know what other books are being read, know what the genre standards are. Even if you're choosing to break through those standards to do something a little different, you should know what the expectations are for your genre. So some folks, I've talked to agents who say, if it works, it works. And that's like a very frustrating thing to hear from an agent, because that it was told to me from an agent last year who was essentially saying, like, if an agent thinks they can sell your book, they're going to sell your book, and it doesn't matter what genre it is. So, that's kind of the tricky wicket when it comes to trying to divine what agents are looking for. Is the agent is going to see a project, and if they think they can make a case for it, they're going to make a case for it. And if they think they can't, then they're not going to represent that author.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I think it's something, and I think the advice of, reading widely and just kind of being aware what other authors are doing is also really useful. And also the word limit. I think a lot of people don't realize, how important that actually is sometimes, because people, can go and write these, mammoths of books, and it's not necessarily going to do them any favors having something, that substantial. Though for a reader, it's a very good bargain if you're getting that many words for the same price as a 100K book. But I think, definitely something to keep in mind. So another thing that I'm curious about is just, could you share, you're obviously a coach on the Ultimate Novel Writing course, so could you share some of the ways that you kind of helped prepare the students on the course for the publishing journey and the process, and how you kind of help them to get, because in the course it's quite demanding, the intention is to emerge after a year of a very ready to go, marketable, publishable book. So how are some of the ways that you help to get students to that end?
Yeah, so this will be my 4th year teaching on the course. And, I think what's really exciting about the course for me as an editor is that some students come into the course with a fully formed project. They've got a draft that's been through multiple revisions. Some folks come in with just an idea, so we work over the course of 12 months to develop the idea sometimes, and sometimes it's a matter of revising the draft and getting to a version that they're going to feel ready to go out to agents with. So I would say I start conversations with those authors at a lot of different points. Sometimes it's just getting off the ground with a project. I think it's really important for authors to create good habits, because no matter what their publishing future looks like, having good, solid, consistent writing habits are really going to carry them far. Whether they, take this novel out and they sell it and sell 1 million copies and then need to write another novel, or this novel doesn't land with agents and they need to write another project. Like, having good, consistent writing habits is really going to help carry them forward. So a lot of our work together focuses first on setting goals, setting targets, and then looking at like what is happening in your life, what is happening in your world that might be presenting a challenge to you with your writing goals, and how can we help address those challenges so that the writing process becomes somewhat less precious and a little bit more process oriented, and a little bit more like just a job you sit down to do. So how can we create goals for you that are going to be realistic and that are going to fit into your life, and then check in periodically about how those goals are actually working. I check in with my authors, with my students regularly, and we have one-on-one conversations at least once a month to talk about how their projects are going. And oftentimes, authors will want to focus on the project first and think about publishing a little bit later down the road. So one thing that I love about the way that this course is designed is that the last couple months are devoted to self-editing, revision, and then thinking about publishing and publishing opportunities and options. So they get a lot of information in the course materials about what the publishing process looks like, how to approach an agent, what components are involved in putting together a submission package. And then, in my group this year, we're going to spend the very last month in our very last meeting pitching and working on pitches. So we're in conversation with each other. They're in conversation with each other. They've been sharing their pitches with each other in the Slack group for the last couple months and honing those together. And we've talked about those in our monthly group meetings too. So we work on it all year long, and it's something that, like I said, some authors really want to dive into up front, and some authors want to kind of think about later after they've had a chance to really focus on the kind of creative component of their manuscript development.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think it's really helpful to kind of tackle things in stages in that way. So kind of, not overwhelm students with all the information at once, just allow them to focus on the work when they need to focus on it, and then also set them up to be able to find success when they are going around and querying agents and writing their synopses and their pitches and everything. I think that sounds like really helpful. I wonder just what are some kind of, I guess, last bits of advice you would give to a writer hoping to get published in the US in particular, and how can they best kind of set themselves up for success, really?
Yeah, it's a great question. Again, just read widely in your genre. Read widely in general, like know what's being published, know what's being read. Sometimes it can be really eye-opening to read something that you would never pick up otherwise. It's not something, on your library shelf on a bookstore shelf that you would ever identify as a book for you. But that's selling zillions of copies, it can be really eye-opening to check out those books and just have a really broad sense of what's popular and what's selling. Be resilient. That's a huge thing. This is a long game. This is a marathon, not a sprint to get published. So you will need to have a thick skin and be organized. So if you are starting to contact agents, you should also be thinking about having a Google Sheet or an Excel spreadsheet or some way to track who you're contacting, when you're contacting them, what materials you're sending, and what feedback you're getting. So, and then, just like learning, like there are so many resources. This course is one of them, to educate yourself about the publishing process, about what agents are looking for. If you're on social media, starting to gather a list of agents who are on social media and just kind of keeping an ear on that can be really helpful and informative as far as what they're looking for, what they're talking about in terms of transitions in the industry. Companies that are being bought and sold, like just this week, Simon & Schuster was sold to a private equity company. I mean, there's like major shifts happening every week in publishing that might not impact you and your publishing future directly, but that you should, just keep an ear to.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice. Verity, is there any last questions that you had for Lindsey?
Yeah, I think just a nice one to finish off. Lindsey, it was just, what's your favourite part, I guess, of being a coach on the Ultimate Novel Writing course?
Oh my gosh. Oh, there's so many. I was trying to pick just one. I love my students. I mean, they're just fantastic folks who are, they're doing this because they've got a project that really lights them up, and they live in and with these projects and with their characters, like day to day and week to week. It's incredibly gratifying to see the relationships they form with each other. My group this year has bonded really closely, and they've actually, they did a whole writing retreat on their own in New Mexico and organized that and got that together. And that's what they did. They keep in touch. They are so supportive of each other. It's just been really exciting to see all the work that they've done, see the ways that they're collaborating, see the ways that they're lifting each other up. And of course, I love our conversations. Like, I can't tell you how privileged and lucky I feel that I get to spend my time and my days living in people's fictional worlds with them and helping them discover the contours of those worlds and how they can make those worlds stronger and how to make somebody else's life light up and somebody else's world spark with the story that they want to tell. So it's just a pleasure. It's just a real joy. And I get 12 months to work with folks. Like, we learned so much about each other over that time. I learned so much about their goals and their projects over that time. And it's just incredibly gratifying to see them, take their projects out into the world after this course and get published and find success. It's just amazing.
Yeah, I have to say, as a former student on the course myself, the most satisfying part was having my tutor Helen just there for those 12 months just to support, and the one-to-one calls. It was just lovely to sort of see the manuscript unfold with her and then have her do the assessment at the end. It's a really lovely process.
Yeah, you have that. Well, your tutor and also your fellow course students will be champions for your novel for life because they've been on that journey alongside with you. So I think they're as much invested in your project by the end as you are. So yeah, it's such a wonderful thing. But thank you so much, Lindsey. I think everyone on this call will agree that was incredibly insightful and I think really helpful to anyone who was looking into getting published, especially in the US. And so I really hope you all enjoyed our conversation today. If you are curious about joining our next Ultimate Novel Writing course and having Lindsey as your mentor, popped a link in the chat. Do check it out. Applications are now open on our website, so just go to jerichowriters.com. You can find out all the information you need, and we're also available anytime to have a chat if you would like to get in touch and speak to us more about the course. But thank you so much, Lindsey. Hopefully some of you will get to spend the next 12 months getting coached in this incredibly supportive way as we just described. And I really can't recommend it enough. But if you are just looking to learn more about the publishing process or find out more about the US market in general, there's a lot of content on our website for free as well. And so go check out our blog post. If you sign up as a premium member, you'll also get access to a whole range of masterclasses, which gives you more information as well. So do check that out. And I really hope you'll join us again for our next In Conversation. And hopefully Lindsey will get to do this again with you soon. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, y'all.